Welcome back to the goofiest story ever told, Sovereign Citizens, Part 4, Black and White. Hello everybody and everybody else. My name is ScriptCat and this is ScriptCat Says. I'm going to start this video with a bit of errata. Errata, people, not erotica. Get your minds out of the gutter. Daniel Levitas wrote a terrific book that was published in 2002 entitled The Terrorist Next Door. I am in the process of reading it. While doing so, I found I was mistaken about some of the things I told you in my last video concerning William Potter Gale. So I'd like to correct that before introducing you to Anna von Reitz. Bill Gale's father, Charles, emigrated to America from Russia. His aunt and uncle had done so about 10 years before. The family was Jewish, this is true. Charles married a nice Episcopalian girl and decided this being Jewish business was a distinct drawback to his assimilation into American life. His aunt and uncle changed their name, or had it changed, from the almost unpronounceable Grabifker to Gale. That was his first step. Next, Charles enlisted in the army, hoping that would endear him to his new country. Back in those days, 1890 to 1914 or thereabouts, the army didn't always keep all their soldiers for years at a time. Charles enlisted and was discharged a few times. The longest enlistment was 3 years, so yes, W.P. Gale could be called an army brat. During Charles's service, he was never promoted beyond private. Part of his service did involve the Spanish-American War. Now, on to Bill Gale. He was actually born in 1916, not 1917. He did enlist in the Army at the age of 16, having lied about his age. He was honorably discharged and re-enlisted sometime later. I still don't know how he was given an officer's commission. His only contact with Filipinos was in California, where he learned to like them very much. He was never in the Philippines and never saw any sort of combat. His specialty, if you will, was logistics, and at one point he was posted to Japan where he coordinated supplies for the Pacific Theater. And I can assure you he didn't do it alone. If he was on MacArthur's staff, it was at the periphery. While he was found to be a most loyal soldier, he was also quite lazy and could frequently be found in his garage, come boxing ring, trying to toughen up his only son, Bill Jr., instead of seeing to his duties on the base. Whenever things became difficult, Bill headed to the infirmary with complaints of quote-unquote jaundice. However, no test ever performed showed any sign of hepatitis or other problems with his liver. He would spend weeks at a time in the hospital. More than one doctor wondered out loud about the psychoneuroses I mentioned in my last video. William Potter Gale was encouraged to resign his commission in 1950, having never sustained any wartime injuries. Also, one last thing. Gale did not die in prison, as I'd been told or read. 3 months after being convicted on federal charges while out on bail, William Potter Gale died at a California Army hospital. So he never got to suffer the consequences of his life's work, in this life at least. I suppose I could be generous and say Gale was a teller of tall tales, or I could just come right out and say he was a bold-faced liar. Either way, my record has now been corrected. Thank you, Mr. Levitas. I recently finished my deep dive into the website known as www.annavonreitz.com. I have read, or tried to read, the first of 1,620 articles she has written. Holy cow. In my whole life, I've never seen such densely packed, absolute utter nonsense. I'd be better off reading the Kama Sutra in the original Hindi by Braille. She claims to be an attorney in the service to Pope Francis, but fails to mention in what capacity. She also claims that her family was serving the pontiff since the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire. She signs her name as, quote, Anna Maria Wilhelmina Hanna Sophia Reitzinger von Reitzenstein von Lettau-Vorbeck. Whew! Let me tell you, if my parents named me something like that, I'd have divorced them when I was 14. She also claims to be a retired judge in the Alaskan state. Note, not the state of Alaska. What I came away with is the overwhelming impression that Miss Reitz has way too much time on her hands. She also thinks a great deal of herself. I wish I could find a biography of her. I'd love to know where she comes from, who are her parents, where she was educated. She's evidently married to someone named James Belcher, with all the quantum grammar intact, and claims to be a great-grandmother. I think that what started her on her road to sovereignty was that she was involved in a 17-year battle with the IRS over the non-payment of taxes, as well as losing her home and property from failure to pay her mortgage. The property was auctioned off in 2014, which spun her into becoming one of, if not the, sovereign citizen guru of recent memory. Absolutely nothing she has preached all these years is new. She hasn't had an original idea in decades. She's just spewing nonsense that goes all the way back to William Potter Gale in the late 60s, minus the hate-filled anti-Semitism and racism. Now let me be fair. Anna's stance on the Jews is that the evil European monarchs forced them to practice usury, thereby making them international bankers. And by that I mean international as in between the nations of Europe at the time. She has a point, as it is true that when Spain kicked out all the Jews living in its borders in 1492, their economy tanked. As far as black people go, she states that the 14th Amendment simply made them municipal slaves rather than privately owned slaves, and encourages blacks and colored people to visit one of her websites to find out more. And to all those listening to me, if someone comes at you with these harebrained ideas, run. Run as fast as you can. Do not let her or her minions get inside your head. Now we move on to the Moors. Ah, the Moors. Every bit of the Sovcit gibberish, with the added twist that they, and only they, are the true indigenous people of North America, nay, the world. They are the mothers and fathers of civilization, if you believe their rhetoric. The Moorish American philosophy started in the 1920s with a man named Thomas Drew, later donning the title of Noble Drew Ali. Thomas Drew was a bit of a drifter, a con man, and a very charismatic storyteller. Thomas Drew, you ask? I thought his name was Timothy Drew. So did I. However, recent research by Fathie Ali Abdat in the Journal of Race, Ethnicity, and Religion has revealed through documents found via Ancestry.com that Noble Drew Ali's real name is in fact Thomas. Seems Thomas was adopted by an aunt and uncle when he was 12 years old. The aunt was very cruel to little Thomas, at one point throwing him into a furnace, which resulted in severe burns to his forearm. These burns were later documented on his World War I draft registration card. Census records show he lived in Norfolk, where he grew up, and Richmond, Virginia, and later in Newark, New Jersey. There was never any travel to Egypt or anywhere else, and as far as can be determined, never worked in a circus. His claim to fame as a mystical leader is all hogwash. He claimed that a priest of some unknown religion gave him a missing portion of the actual Quran. This he spun into the Circle 7 Quran. The Circle 7 Quran is actually a plagiarization, is that a word? Well, it is now, of two different works. A Rosicrucian work entitled To Thee I Grant, and the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus, sprinkled with his own take on Islam. As far as his belief in Islam, that's up for grabs. He claimed the right to marry and divorce at will, and did so often. Most actual Muslims would contest his beliefs. Anyway, in 1913, Drew, or Ali, founded the Moorish Science Temple of America, MSTA, in Newark, but moved it to Chicago in 1925 to be closer to Mecca. I don't know how that worked, but okay. His idea was to raise up the Negro and put him on a level playing field with the whites. To do that, he came up with the idea that since Negroes of the time rarely knew where their actual kinfolk came from in Africa, he would provide them with a history of sorts. He taught that all blacks were of Moorish, Moroccan origin, but had their Muslim identity taken away from them through slavery and racial segregation. He advocated that they should return to the Islam of their Moorish forefathers, redeeming themselves from racial oppression by reclaiming their historical, spiritual heritage. That's from the Encyclopedia Britannica. Drew Ali died in 1928 of tubercular bronchopneumonia. However, there is speculation that brutality at the hands of the police may have brought on the pneumonia. He had been suspected of the murder of one of his associates, Claude Green Bay. Drew Ali was out of town at the time of the stabbing murder, but was arrested on his return to Chicago. The MSTA is still a thriving concern, although their numbers are nowhere near the 30,000 claimed during Drew Ali's lifetime. After his death, the temple split into factions and has been noted by Louis Farrakhan as the foundation for the Nation of Islam. According to Wikipedia, during the 1990s, some former followers of the MSTA and the Washita Nation formed an offshoot of the sovereign citizen movement, which came to be known as Moorish sovereign citizens. These Sovcits, who consider that black people constitute an elite class within American society, are in the paradoxical situation of using an ideology which originated in the white supremacy environment. As most Sovcits, they are practiced in filing liens against anyone they believe has disrespected them, and practice adverse possession on a regular basis. Otherwise, their rhetoric is just like any other Sovcit, and they tend to violence. The rise of the Moors incident in Massachusetts was quite the wake-up call. And there you have it. The sovereign citizen movement of today has grown out of the tax protesters of the 60s, the Christian identity and posse comitatus of the 70s, the farm crisis of the 80s, and the militia movement of the 90s. If people who choose to believe in conspiracies have learned anything, it is that organizational structure is to be avoided, as such structures are too easily infiltrated by the authorities. That's where that chick in California, what's her name? Una paloma blanca. I'm sorry, that song pops into my head every time I hear her name. Anyway, she's getting way too organized, but still selling the same garbage, especially land patents, which have been judicially debunked for years now. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into sovereign citizens as much as I've enjoyed researching it. Join me next week as we make our way through the crazy once again. Bye for now.